Let's get some analysis of what this means in terms of the continuation of a long-distance war and the type of ammunition needed to do just that. Rosemary Kelanic joins us. She's director of the Middle East Programme at Defence Priorities, a think tank. Thank you, Rosemary, for being with us here in France 24. We appreciate your time. Give us your assessment of where we are at right now in this war between Israel and Iran.
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. Well, we're at a very perilous and dangerous point in this war. And of course, as you mentioned already, there are a lot of questions in the United States as to whether the United States might be joining the war with Israel against Iran or not. That remains to be seen. The president seems to be signaling today that he's giving himself a longer runway than most people in Washington expected. I think many of us have been bracing over the past few days for an announcement sort of imminently, and now it looks like he's putting off the decision, or at least reserving the right to do so, which does seem to be, in my view, a good idea.
Is he perhaps hoping that in some way, shape or form, this war will work itself out in between time without the US getting involved in that sense?
Not so much I think that the war will work itself out, but I think that Trump is still hopeful to work out a deal with Iran, to come to an agreement on limiting their nuclear program, eliminating any chance that Iran could get a nuclear weapon in the future. When this attack first happened, I initially thought that the prospects for a deal were very low. But right now, Iran is really in a bind. They're under a lot of pressure. They're under a lot of stress. They're not able to compete with Israel militarily. And so it still could be the case that if President Trump is deft in his diplomacy, and if Witkoff is deft in his diplomacy, that they could potentially convince the Iranians to make a deal. At the same time, the bigger challenge, I think, is restraining the Israelis if Iran does make a deal. I think Trump is still very much looking for that option instead of getting involved in a kinetic offensive capacity.
Indeed, this conflict has been a long time brewing. We could say since 1979, perhaps, when the Islamic regime was set up, the Shah was overthrown. I mean, clearly between then there's been this real enmity between the United States and Iran. Of course, put Israel in the middle of that on the side of the US. It becomes a bulwark against the Iranian interests. The rest, of course, is history. In terms of the firepower, Rosemary, I'd be interested to get your take on that situation, because clearly we know about Iran's long-distance missiles. Equally, we know about the backing that Israel has had year on year from the United States in terms of beefing up its military. And that has been enhanced even more during its conflict in Gaza. Where do we stand there? I mean, clearly we're not at equality. Which side has the advantage in your view?
By far, Israel has the advantage. I mean, Israel is a nuclear weapons state. Israel has a nuclear deterrent. That's going to put a limit, presumably, on the amount of retaliation that Iran is willing to risk against Israel. The same is true of the United States. The United States also has a massive nuclear deterrent and a conventional deterrent. That, I think, is one reason that Iran has been restrained so far and has not attacked American targets in the region. But I do think that could change if the United States enters the war. Militarily, it's not clear whether Israel can destroy all of the nuclear sites on its own, including the site at Fordo. There's a huge controversy about that. Some analyses have suggested that maybe they'd be able to do it. Others say not so much. That's really where Israel seems to be looking to the United States to get an assist, but it's not clear that the United States can entirely do it. But then there's also the bigger problem, which is even if you destroy Fordo, and even if you destroy many of the sites, the Iranian government has been enriching uranium for 20 years. They know how to do it, and you're only setting back the program. You're not necessarily destroying it in any sort of final capacity. And of course, if the United States gets involved, there are possibilities for retaliation against the United States troops in the region, which could lead to an escalation of the conflict. Anytime that American troops are hurt or killed abroad, there's a lot of pressure in Washington for the US to get more and more involved.
Rosemary, I was at a briefing last night with Iran's ambassador at the embassy here in Paris, special briefing for journalists. I was invited along. On that issue of enrichment, we asked that question, why? How can you justify it? What is it about? And he said that it's not about weapons, it's about better producing electricity. Would you think that is a plausible thing to say, or would you think that basically it is not quite the truth?
I think the truth is somewhere in between. I think the truth is that Iran has enriched uranium up to highly enriched uranium levels, up to 60% maximum at least that we know of. And there are not civilian uses for that uranium. However, they've done that for years now, and they've not progressed from 60% to 90%. 90% is the sort of critical threshold where uranium can actually become usable in a nuclear device. So to me, I see this as signaling, very high stakes and potentially reckless signaling by Iran to say, look, we're using our nuclear enrichment program as a bargaining tool. We want sanctions lifted on Iran, right? They have all kinds of asks in that way. They want to be reintegrated in the international community, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I think it's understandable that they would want enrichment. I think that it's a high stakes gamble for them to enrich beyond civilian capacity. But I think the key feature here is that Iran could have enriched to 90% a long time ago, and they have not. They've not done that. So I think that they're trying to signal that they're willing to make a deal. I think if Iran truly wanted nuclear weapons, they would have pursued them already. And they have not done that. So I see a lot of, high stakes maneuvering. It's not just about civilian energy. Clearly, that's not just it. But it doesn't mean that they're bent on getting a nuclear weapon. And in fact, I think that they would rather not have one, at least not till now. And hopefully that remains the case.
Rosemary, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. It's much appreciated. Rosemary Kelanic, Director of the Middle East Programme at Defence Priorities Think Tank. Thanks for joining us here in France 24. We appreciate your time. Thank you.